November 17, 1966. Phuoc Tuy Province, South Vietnam. Corporal Kevin Dasher Wheatley moved through the jungle with a patience that would have seemed bizarre to most American units operating in Vietnam. His 5-man patrol from 5 Platoon, B Company, 7th Battalion, Royal Australian Regiment, had been in the same square kilometer of dense rainforest for 3 days. They'd covered maybe 2 kilometers total. In the distance, through the thick canopy, Wheatley could hear the distinctive whump, whump, whump of American Hueys conducting another sweep 20 clicks to the north. Operation Attleboro, the Americans called it. 22,000 troops, the largest operation of the war so far, churning through War Zone C like a mechanized tornado. The radio traffic was constant. Grid coordinates, fire missions, body counts, extraction requests, medevac calls. Here, in the suffocating green silence of Operation Ulmarra, Wheatley's patrol hadn't fired a shot. They'd seen plenty: bunker systems, supply caches, fresh footprints in the red clay. But they moved like ghosts, observing, mapping, waiting. The oppressive 95-degree heat made every breath feel like drowning. His pack felt like it weighed 100 pounds. Leeches found every gap in his uniform. But he didn't make noise. 20 meters ahead, his tracker, a Papuan native with the Pacific Islands Regiment, stopped and raised a closed fist. Everyone froze. The tracker pointed to a small depression where the jungle floor dipped. Fresh boot prints, North Vietnamese Army regulars moving south, maybe 6 hours old. Wheatley whispered into his radio, barely audible even a meter away. "Contact sign. Tracking." In the American operational zone to the north, the body count was climbing toward 100 enemy killed. Attleboro would be declared a stunning tactical success. But the North Vietnamese would simply move their base camps 50 kilometers west and continue operations within weeks. Here in Phuoc Tuy, the Australians were playing a different game entirely. And they were about to prove that winning battles meant nothing if you lost the war. When General William Westmoreland arrived in Vietnam as commander of Military Assistance Command, Vietnam, MACV, in June 1964, he brought with him a doctrine forged in the decisive victories of World War II and refined in Korea. Find the enemy, fix him in place, and destroy him with superior firepower. It was elegant in its simplicity and, to Pentagon strategists, self-evidently correct. The solution in Vietnam is more bombs, more shells, more napalm, Westmoreland would declare, until the other side cracks and gives up. The core philosophy was attrition warfare elevated to industrial scale. Search and destroy operations would send large American units, battalions, brigades, sometimes entire divisions, into enemy-held territory to locate Viet Cong and North Vietnamese forces, engage them with massive firepower superiority, inflict catastrophic casualties, and force them to either surrender or cease operations. The metric of success was brutally simple: the body count. Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara, the former Ford Motor Company president who ran the Pentagon like a corporate efficiency study, loved the quantifiable nature of this approach. "Every quantitative measurement we have shows we're winning this war," he told reporters in 1966. Dead enemy soldiers could be counted, charted, graphed, and projected. The mathematics seemed irrefutable. The United States could produce casualties faster than North Vietnam could replace them. The strategy seemed even more foolproof when combined with America's revolutionary new capability: airmobile warfare. The helicopter, specifically the UH-1 Huey, meant American infantry could be inserted anywhere within minutes, supported by massive artillery and air power, then extracted before the enemy could mass for a counterattack. It was warfare at the speed of flight. And American commanders were certain it would overwhelm any conventional or guerrilla force. "We're going to out-guerrilla the guerrilla," Colonel John Paul Vann famously declared, and out-ambush the ambush. Initial operations in 1965 seemed to validate this confidence. In the IA Drang Valley that November, the 1st Cavalry Division, Airmobile, killed an estimated 1,200 to 3,000 North Vietnamese soldiers, while suffering 305 American deaths. The kill ratio, 4-1, perhaps 10-1, looked spectacular on paper. American firepower was devastating. B-52 strikes could obliterate entire grid squares. Artillery could deliver hundreds of tons of steel onto suspected enemy positions within minutes. The generals saw tactical brilliance. The Pentagon saw statistical success. What they failed to see was that they were fighting an entirely different war than the one they'd prepared for. Because while American units were racking up impressive body counts, the enemy was simply walking away and coming back. The intellectual origins of search and destroy can be traced to a fundamental mismatch between American military culture and the reality of revolutionary warfare in Vietnam. The U.S. military in 1964 was the most powerful conventional fighting force in human history, built to fight and destroy the Soviet army in the plains of Central Europe. Every doctrine, every training program, every piece of equipment was designed for that mission. Vietnam was supposed to be simpler. President Lyndon Johnson's escalation in 1965 from 23,000 military advisors to 184,000 combat troops by year's end, eventually reaching 536,000 by 1968, came with a clear mandate: win quickly, decisively, and get out. The American public would support a short, victorious war. They would not support a protracted stalemate. General Westmoreland's solution was to leverage America's overwhelming advantages in mobility, firepower, and technology. At his headquarters in Saigon, MACV planners developed an operational framework that seemed brilliantly suited to American strengths. Phase 1. Large-scale search and destroy operations would locate and destroy main force enemy units. The North Vietnamese Army Regulars and Viet Cong battalions. These operations would be characterized by massive sweeps through enemy base areas, supported by unprecedented levels of artillery, air power, and helicopter mobility. Phase 2. Once main force units were defeated, smaller clear-and-hold operations would secure rural areas, allowing pacification programs to win the hearts and minds of the Vietnamese population. Phase 3. With the insurgency broken, the United States could gradually hand over security responsibilities to the South Vietnamese government and military. It was logical, sequential, and completely wrong. The first major search and destroy operations began in earnest in 1965. Operation Starlight in August sent Marines against a Viet Cong regiment on the Van Tuong Peninsula. The Americans killed an estimated 614 VC while suffering 45 dead, a tactical masterpiece. Operation Silver Bayonet, the Battle of Ia Drang. In November, saw the new airmobile tactics devastate North Vietnamese forces. But there were warning signs, visible to those willing to see them. Lieutenant Colonel Harold Moore, who commanded at Ia Drang, later wrote, "We had won a tactical victory, to be sure, but we had also learned that the North Vietnamese were tough, experienced, and willing to die in frightening numbers to achieve their objectives. More importantly, they got to choose when and where to fight." That last observation was crucial. American search and destroy operations required finding the enemy, and the enemy only appeared when they wanted to fight. When they didn't, they simply melted into the jungle, crossed into Cambodia or Laos where American forces couldn't follow, or hid in elaborate tunnel complexes like those at Cu Chi. The training American units received at bases like Fort Polk, Louisiana, or even in-country at orientation centers, focused on conventional infantry tactics adapted for jungle warfare. Soldiers learned to call in artillery and airstrikes, to establish fire bases, to conduct helicopter assaults. What they didn't learn, because the doctrine didn't emphasize it, was how to actually find an enemy who didn't want to be found, or how to hold ground once captured. As early as 1966, field-grade officers were reporting concerns. The enemy was learning. They developed a tactic called grab them by the belt, closing to such short range that American artillery and air power couldn't be used without hitting their own troops. They learned to avoid open areas where they could be spotted from the air. They created extensive intelligence networks that often gave them advance warning of American operations. Major General Frederick Wyand, one of the more perceptive American commanders, noted, "The enemy's great advantage is that he controls the tempo of operations by deciding when, where, and how he will fight. In most cases, we run his course." But these concerns were drowned out by the body counts pouring into MACV headquarters. The statistics looked phenomenal. From 1965 to 1967, reported enemy killed in action climbed from $34,000 to $88,000 to $120,000. The crossover point, where enemy casualties exceeded their ability to replace losses, seemed inevitable. What the statistics didn't show was that it didn't matter. January 8, 1967, the Iron Triangle, Binh Duong Province Operation Cedar Falls, was supposed to be the decisive blow. The largest American operation of the war to date. 30,000 U.S. and South Vietnamese troops would sweep through the Iron Triangle, a notorious Viet Cong stronghold just 20 miles north of Saigon. The plan was textbook search and destroy. Massive helicopter assaults, armored sweeps, relentless artillery, B-52 strikes, and finally, bulldozers to literally erase the jungle and villages that provided cover to the enemy. Major General William Dupuy, commander of the 1st Infantry Division, was confident. "We're going to solve the problem of the Iron Triangle permanently. When we're done, there will be nothing left for Charlie to hide in." The operation began at dawn. Thousands of troops landed simultaneously across the triangle. Engineers with Rome plows, enormous bulldozers with massive blades, began clear-cutting the jungle at a rate of 1,000 acres per day. Entire villages suspected of supporting the Viet Cong were bulldozed. The 173rd Airborne Brigade conducted the only combat parachute jump of the Vietnam War, landing on an open field to cut off enemy escape routes. Within days, American units began discovering the extent of the underground world the Viet Cong had created. The tunnel complex at Cu Chi alone contained 75 miles of tunnels. Entire underground cities with hospitals, command centers, sleeping quarters, and weapons factories. Tunnel rats, small-statured American soldiers willing to descend into the claustrophobic darkness, found documents, supply caches, and occasionally, enemy soldiers. The statistics looked impressive. 711 enemy dead, by body count. 488 prisoners, 512 captured weapons, 5,987 captured documents. Cedar Falls was declared a major success, but Private First Class Robert Santos, 1st Infantry Division, saw it differently. We'd sweep through an area, have a firefight, count bodies, then move on. 3 days later, intelligence would report enemy activity in the exact same spot. We'd go back and do it all over again. The tunnel systems were so extensive that we couldn't possibly clear them all. We'd blow one entrance, and they'd just dig another. The reality was even more sobering. While American forces occupied the Iron Triangle, Viet Cong activity did decrease. They simply moved operations a few kilometers away. The moment the massive American presence withdrew, the VC returned. Within weeks, intelligence reports confirmed enemy forces were back in strength. Lieutenant Colonel William Haponsky, who led a battalion during Cedar Falls, later wrote, "We won every battle, cleared every objective, achieved every operational goal, and accomplished precisely nothing strategic. The enemy decided when to fight and when to disappear. We could kill them by the hundreds, even thousands, but we couldn't make them stop coming. February 27, 1967. War Zone C. The Operation Junction City followed immediately after Cedar Falls, targeting War Zone C near the Cambodian border. It was even larger. 45,000 troops, multiple divisions, the works. The Americans would create a massive horseshoe-shaped cordon, drive the enemy into it, and destroy them. The North Vietnamese had other plans. Captain Nguyen Van Minh, commanding a company of the 271st Regiment, NVA, described the Vietnamese response. We watched the Americans arrive with their hundreds of helicopters, their endless ammunition, their powerful bombs. We knew we couldn't match that firepower. But we didn't need to. We knew they would leave eventually. They always did. We just had to survive, make them pay in blood for their victories, and wait. The NVA did engage, on their terms. At Soi Tre on March 21st, the 272nd Regiment launched a dawn assault on a U.S. fire support base. They overran parts of the perimeter before American artillery and air power turned the tide. The U.S. claimed 647 enemy dead against 31 American killed. Another tactical victory. But specialist James Robinson, who survived the assault, remembered, "They came at us in waves, knowing they were going to die, and they kept coming anyway. We killed hundreds of them, but they weren't trying to hold ground, they were just making a statement. We're still here, we're still fighting, and you can't make us stop." That's when I started to understand we weren't going to win this thing with body counts. Junction City lasted 72 days and resulted in 2,128 reported enemy killed against 282 American dead, nearly a 10-to-1 kill ratio. Once again, it was declared a significant victory. Once again, the enemy simply returned when American forces withdrew. As 1967 progressed, both sides adapted to the brutal reality of search-and-destroy warfare. But their adaptations revealed the fundamental asymmetry of the conflict. American tactical evolution focused on increasing the efficiency of finding and destroying enemy forces. Fire support bases sprang up across South Vietnam, fortified artillery positions that could provide 24/7 fire support to infantry operations. The 107mm self-propelled gun could hit targets 20 miles away. Sensors dropped from aircraft could detect enemy movement. Agent Orange defoliation cleared jungle cover. B-52 strikes could obliterate anything in a box 1.2 miles long and half a mile wide. The Americans got better at killing. What they couldn't get better at was making those kills matter strategically. Colonel David Hackworth, one of the most decorated officers in Vietnam, described the escalating frustration. "We'd develop intelligence on an enemy base camp, mount an operation with a battalion or brigade, insert by helicopter, engage with overwhelming firepower, and, maybe, kill 50 or 100 enemy soldiers. We'd find bunkers, supply caches, documents. We'd blow it all up, count our bodies, call it a success, and leave." 2 weeks later, Charlie was back. The same base camp, rebuilt. We'd lost maybe 5 guys in the operation. They'd lost 50. We'd won. Except we hadn't. Free fire zones expanded across South Vietnam. Areas where anyone spotted could be engaged without permission. Entire regions were declared hostile territory. Villages were forcibly relocated. The term pacification took on increasingly brutal overtones. But the Vietnamese were adapting too, in ways that exploited the fundamental weaknesses of American strategy. The North Vietnamese and Viet Cong perfected the art of Dao Tran, struggle warfare. They learned exactly how long they could engage before American firepower became overwhelming, usually about 15 minutes, the time it took for artillery and air support to arrive. They developed elaborate early warning systems using civilians, children, and sympathetic individuals throughout South Vietnam. Vo Nguyen Giap, the brilliant North Vietnamese military strategist, articulated the counter-doctrine. The enemy will pass slowly from the offensive to the defensive. The blitzkrieg will transform itself into a war of long duration. Thus, the enemy will be caught in a dilemma. He has to drag out the war in order to win it, and does not possess, on the other hand, the psychological and political means to fight a long drawn-out war. Captain Tran Van Tra, who fought in multiple engagements against American search and destroy operations, explained, "We couldn't match their firepower. One American infantry company had more firepower than our entire battalion. But we didn't need to defeat them militarily. We needed to outlast them politically. Every American soldier killed, every month of stalemate, worked in our favor. We were fighting for our country. They were fighting for what? We could take losses that would destroy their will to fight." The tunnel systems at Cu Chi, the Iron Triangle, and dozens of other locations proved nearly impossible to eliminate. American forces would find a tunnel entrance, use dogs, gas, or tunnel rats to explore them, blow selected chambers, then declare the complex destroyed. Days later, it would be operational again. Specialist Arnold Gutierrez, a tunnel rat with the 25th Infantry Division, described the psychological toll. You'd go down into these tunnels, pitch black, barely wide enough to crawl through, knowing there might be an enemy soldier around the next turn, or booby traps, or poisonous snakes they'd leave down there. You'd map it, blow what you could, and feel like you'd accomplished something. Then you'd hear that same tunnel complex was active again a week later. It felt like we were trying to empty the ocean with a teaspoon. Vietnamese tactics evolved to specifically exploit American weaknesses. They learned that U.S. units operating near the Cambodian or Laotian borders could be attacked, and the NVA could retreat to sanctuaries Americans couldn't legally pursue. They discovered that American units had predictable patterns. They would typically land, establish a perimeter, send out patrols, and operate from that base. Ambushes could be positioned accordingly. Most devastatingly, they learned that American political will was fragile. Every American casualty reported on the evening news back home eroded support for the war. Every stalemate, every repeated operation in the same area, every gap between optimistic official statements and grim battlefield realities weakened American resolve. By late 1967, some American soldiers were beginning to lose faith in the strategy. The term search and destroy had become so controversial, evoking images of destructive sweeps through Vietnamese villages, that Westmoreland officially changed it to search and clear in March 1968. The change in terminology didn't change the reality. January 30, 1968, Tet Offensive. After 3 years of search and destroy operations, after hundreds of thousands of reported enemy casualties, after countless declarations of progress and approaching victory, the North Vietnamese and Viet Cong launched the largest offensive of the war. 70,000 troops attacked over 100 cities and military installations across South Vietnam simultaneously. Viet Cong commandos even breached the U.S. Embassy compound in Saigon, an image that destroyed Westmoreland's credibility in one explosive moment. The United States and South Vietnamese forces responded with devastating firepower. The Battle of Hue lasted 26 days and leveled much of the ancient city. Across South Vietnam, the offensive was crushed in purely military terms. American and ARVN forces killed an estimated 45,000 enemy troops. The Viet Cong infrastructure, which had remained hidden during years of American operations, was destroyed when they exposed themselves during Tet. It was the greatest tactical victory of the war for the United States. The enemy had suffered catastrophic losses. The body count was overwhelming. By every metric that MACV had used to measure progress for 3 years, Tet proved the Americans were winning. And yet, It was the decisive strategic defeat that ended American hopes of military victory in Vietnam. CBS anchor Walter Cronkite, the most trusted voice in American media, visited Vietnam after Tet and concluded, "It seems now more certain than ever that the bloody experience of Vietnam is to end in a stalemate." President Johnson reportedly said, "If I've lost Cronkite, I've lost Middle America." The American public saw the gap between official optimism and battlefield reality. They'd been told the enemy was beaten, nearly destroyed, that victory was approaching. Now the enemy had just launched the largest offensive of the war and attacked the U.S. Embassy itself. General Westmoreland requested an additional 206,000 troops to exploit the opportunity Tet had created. The request was leaked to the press and caused political shockwaves. The United States already had over 500,000 troops in Vietnam, had been bombing the North for 3 years, had killed hundreds of thousands of enemy soldiers, and now needed even more troops? The strategic bankruptcy of search and destroy was suddenly, painfully obvious. You could win every battle and still lose the war. Body counts meant nothing if the enemy's will to fight remained unbroken. Occupying ground was pointless if you couldn't hold it permanently. And the American public's willingness to accept casualties was evaporating. Within months, Johnson announced he wouldn't seek re-election. Peace talks began in Paris. Westmoreland was quietly reassigned back to the United States. Search and destroy as a strategic concept was dead, killed not by enemy action, but by its own contradictions. First, Lieutenant Michael Hare, a correspondent who covered the war, captured the bitter irony. "We took space back quickly, expensively, with total panic and close to maximum brutality. Our machine was devastating and versatile. It could do everything but stop." Richard Nixon's inauguration in January 1969 brought an explicit repudiation of search and destroy strategy, though his administration would never phrase it that way. Vietnamization, the gradual withdrawal of American forces while building up South Vietnamese capability to fight the war themselves, was an implicit admission that 3 years of attrition warfare had failed. The final statistics told a devastating story. From 1965 to 1968, American search and destroy operations reported killing approximately 200,000 enemy combatants. American casualties in that same period, 20,000 killed. A 10-to-1 kill ratio should have been decisive. It wasn't. The North Vietnamese and Viet Cong had infiltrated approximately 150,000 to 200,000 personnel into South Vietnam annually, easily replacing their losses. The crossover point, where casualties exceeded replacements, never came. It couldn't come. For North Vietnam, this was a war of national survival. They would fight with whatever forces they could muster for as long as it took. Lieutenant General Dave Richard Palmer, writing in his military history of Vietnam, concluded, "Search and destroy operations were fundamentally flawed because they measured success by enemy casualties rather than strategic objectives. We became obsessed with killing and forgot why we were killing. The result was a war where we won virtually every tactical engagement and lost the strategic conflict." Vietnamese perspectives on search and destroy operations revealed a more complex picture than simple American failure. Colonel Bui Tin, NVA, who later became a journalist and dissident, wrote, "The American firepower was absolutely devastating. When they found us, when they fixed us in place, it was horrifying. The bombs, the artillery, the helicopter gunships. We had nothing that could match it. Our casualties were indeed severe. But we learned that we didn't have to match it. We only had to survive it." The lessons of search and destroy operations would echo through future American conflicts. In Iraq in 2003-2007, U.S. forces would initially employ similar large-scale sweep operations, with similar results: impressive tactical victories that produced no strategic progress. The shift to counterinsurgency doctrine, focusing on protecting the population rather than hunting insurgents, paralleled what some American officers had advocated for in Vietnam decades earlier. In Afghanistan, the lesson was relearned again. Occupying ground means nothing if you can't hold it after your forces leave. Body counts are meaningless if the enemy's will to fight remains unbroken. Technology and firepower superiority guarantee tactical success, but not strategic victory. Captain Kevin Wheatley never saw the final collapse of South Vietnam in 1975. He had been killed in action on November 13, 1965, during a contact with a larger Viet Cong force. His patrol, conducting the patient, methodical operations that characterized Australian tactics, had maintained contact with the enemy for 5 hours, calling in artillery and air support while evading encirclement. He was posthumously awarded the Victoria Cross, Australia's highest military honor. The difference in approach was stark. While American units conducted massive sweeps that produced temporary results, Australian forces in Phuoc Tuy province, never more than a few thousand troops, established enduring presence through constant patrolling, local engagement, and what would later be recognized as proper counterinsurgency. Their operations weren't called search and destroy. They were called area domination. The jungle of Phuoc Tuy province taught a lesson that American doctrine failed to learn. In revolutionary warfare, the side that can endure longer wins. Firepower, technology, and tactical brilliance matter, but will, patience, and strategic coherence matter more. Search and destroy operations killed hundreds of thousands of enemy soldiers, demonstrated American military capability, and won countless tactical victories. They also proved that war is not mathematics, that body counts are not strategy, and that knowing how to fight is meaningless without understanding why you're fighting. The American machine was indeed devastating and versatile. It could do everything but stop the war it was fighting.